Hey everyone, welcome to another deep dive, exploring relationships. And today we're going to be looking at the idea of the passion trap.
Okay.
And to help us, we have the book, The Passion Trap, How to Write an Unbalanced Relationship by Dr. Dean C. Delis.
Sounds intriguing.
So what is this passion trap all about?
Well, the basic premise is that in many relationships, one person ends up being more in love than the other person.
There's an imbalance.
Right. One person is more emotionally invested. They're what Dr. Delis calls the one down, and the other person is the one up.
And this difference in how much each person is invested can cause problems.
Exactly. It often lies at the root of a lot of conflict and unhappiness in relationships.
So the more in love you are, the worse off you are.
Well, it's not quite as simple as that, but Dr. Delis does argue that the more the one down seeks love and affection, the more the one up tends to withdraw.
Huh. So it's kind of counterintuitive.
It is. It's almost like a pursuer-distancer dynamic.
Oh, I've heard of that.
The more one person chases, the more the other pulls away.
And so who are these one-ups and one-downs?
Anyone, really. Dr. Delis emphasizes that both men and women can find themselves in either position.
So it's not about gender stereotypes.
Right. It's not about some inherent difference between men and women. It's about the dynamics that can develop between two people in a relationship.
That makes sense. And to illustrate these dynamics, Dr. Delis uses the stories of three couples.
Yeah, he follows these couples to show us how the passion trap can play out in different ways.
And who are these couples?
Well, there's Paul and Laura, who are both lawyers.
Okay, a power couple.
Yeah, and Laura's career is really taking off, which is creating some tension in their relationship.
I see.
Then there's Deborah, who's an art teacher, and Jonathan, who's a contractor.
Okay, so very different professions.
Right, and they also have very different needs when it comes to closeness and solitude.
Interesting.
And finally, we have Beth, who's a restaurant manager, and Miles, who's a PR executive.
Okay, another high-powered couple.
And they're facing the challenges that come with having a baby.
I can imagine.
So each of these couples illustrates a different aspect of the passion trap.
That's a great way to explore the nuances of this concept.
Yeah, and by seeing how these couples navigate their challenges, we can learn a lot about how to avoid or escape the passion trap ourselves.
Okay, so how does this passion trap actually start? I mean, how do you end up as the one-up or the one-down?
Well, Dr. Delis says that it often begins with that initial spark of attraction.
You know, that feeling of butterflies in your stomach.
Exactly. And when you're really attracted to someone, you can become afraid of losing them.
That fear of rejection can be intense.
It can, and that fear can actually intensify your feelings of passion.
So the more afraid you are of losing someone, the more in love you feel.
In a way, yes, but it's not always a healthy kind of love.
Because it's driven by fear.
Right, and that fear can make you act in ways that are not in your best interest.
Like what?
Well, for one thing, it can make you try too hard to win the other person over. You might become overly accommodating or put your own needs aside just to please them.
So you're trying to control the situation.
In a sense, yes, you're trying to control their feeling for you because you're afraid of what will happen if they don't love you back.
And that can backfire.
It often does, because the more you try to control the situation, the more likely you are to push the other person away.
So even those grand romantic gestures, those big displays of affection, might actually be about control rather than genuine love.
That's what Dr. Delis suggests. He argues that those kinds of gestures are often motivated by a desire to secure the other person's love to ease your own anxiety.
It's like you're trying to buy their love.
In a way, yes, and that can create a sense of imbalance in the relationship because it suggests that your love is conditional on them behaving in a certain way.
It's almost like you're saying, I'll love you if.
Exactly, and that kind of conditional love is not a recipe for a healthy and fulfilling relationship.
I can see that.
So it's important to be aware of those underlying motivations when you're in the early stages of a relationship.
To make sure that your actions are coming from a place of genuine love and not from a place of fear or insecurity.
Right, because when you're acting out of fear, you're more likely to make choices that will sabotage the relationship in the long run.
So what happens next? I mean, once those initial sparks have settled a bit, how does this passion trap really take hold?
Well, as the relationship progresses, we all develop these little defense mechanisms, ways of interpreting our partner's actions and words.
We're trying to figure them out.
Exactly. We're trying to decode their behavior and understand what it means for the relationship.
But sometimes those interpretations can be wrong.
They can, especially when we're feeling insecure or anxious.
So we might misinterpret a harmless comment or action as a sign that our partner is pulling away.
Right, and that can trigger a whole cascade of negative thoughts and feelings.
Leading us to act in ways that further damage the relationship.
Precisely so. It's crucial to be aware of those defense mechanisms and to challenge those negative interpretations.
To check in with our partner and
Uh-huh.
make sure that we're not jumping to conclusions.
Exactly, because often those negative interpretations are more about our own insecurities than about anything our partner is actually doing.
That's a good point.
And that's how the passion trap can really start to take hold as those negative interpretations and insecure behaviors become a self-fulfilling prophecy.
So the more insecure we feel, the more we act in ways that make our partner pull away.
And the more our partner pulls away, the more insecure we feel.
It's a vicious cycle.
It is, and it can be very difficult to break out of once it gets going.
So what can we do?
Well, that's what we'll be exploring in more detail throughout this deep dive. We'll be looking at the different ways that the passion trap can manifest.
And the strategies that we can use to break free from its grasp.
Right, because even though the passion trap can be a powerful force, it's not inevitable.
We can learn to recognize the signs and take steps to create healthier, more balanced relationships.
Exactly, and that's what we're here to help you do.
So stay tuned as we delve deeper into the complexities of love and relationships and uncover the secrets to escaping the passion trap. So we've talked about how this passion trap gets started, how those initial sparks of attraction and fear of rejection can set the stage for imbalance. But what happens next? How does this imbalance actually play out in a relationship?
Well, one of the key things that Dr. Delis points out is that as that initial intensity fades, the power dynamics in the relationship start to shift.
Okay, so one person starts to gain the upper hand.
In a way, yes, the one up often becomes more distant, more withdrawn, while the one down becomes more insecure and more eager to please.
So it's like that pursuer-distancer dynamic we were talking about earlier.
Exactly. The one down's attempts to get closer just push the one up further away.
And this can be really confusing for the one down.
It can, because they're doing everything they can to make the other person happy, but it's not working.
It's like their efforts are backfiring.
They are, and that can lead to a lot of frustration and resentment.
We see this with Paul, right?
Yeah, as Laura becomes more successful in her career, she starts to pull away from Paul both physically and emotionally.
And how does Paul react to that?
Well, he becomes increasingly anxious and insecure. He starts to question her love for him, and he tries even harder to please her.
But that just makes things worse.
It does, because it reinforces the power imbalance in the relationship.
Laura feels smothered by his neediness, while Paul feels rejected and unloved.
Right, and this is a classic example of how the passion trap can create a downward spiral in a relationship.
Okay, so that's one way that the imbalance can play out. But what about those situational factors you mentioned earlier? Can external circumstances also contribute to the passion trap?
Absolutely. Dr. Delis emphasizes that the passion trap isn't always about personality or individual choices.
Right.
Sometimes it's about the situation that the couple finds themselves in.
Okay, I'm curious to hear more about this. Can you give us an example?
Sure, let's look at Beth and Miles. They were pretty balanced in the beginning, but after they had their baby, things started to change. Well, Beth became the primary caregiver, which meant that she was spending most of her time and energy on the baby.
That makes sense.
And while Miles was supportive, he was also working long hours to provide for the family.
So they were both under a lot of stress,
They were, and that stress started to create distance between them.
even though they were both doing what they thought was best for the family.
Right, and that's the thing about situational imbalance. It can happen even when both partners have good intentions.
So it's not about blame, it's about circumstance.
Exactly. And in Beth and Miles' case, the imbalance was created by the demands of parenthood.
Which is a pretty common situation for new parents.
It is, and it's important to recognize that those external pressures can have a real impact on the relationship.
Because if you're not careful, those pressures can lead to resentment and disconnection.
Right. So it's important to talk about those pressures and to find ways to support each other through them.
To make sure that you're still making time for each other, even when life gets crazy.
Exactly. Because even though you can't always control the circumstances, you can control how you respond to them.
And that's where Dr. Delis's insights can be really helpful.
They can, because he offers practical strategies for navigating those difficult situations and for restoring balance in the relationship.
So let's talk about those strategies. What does Dr. Delis suggest that we do when we find ourselves caught in this passion trap?
Well, the first step is to recognize the problem.
To become aware of the imbalance and how it's affecting the relationship.
Right, because often we're so caught up in our own feelings and reactions that we don't see the bigger picture.
You're not seeing the dynamic that's playing out between us and our partner.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important to step back and to look at the relationship with fresh eyes.
To ask ourselves, is this really working? Are we both happy?
Right. And to be honest with ourselves about the answers.
Because sometimes the hardest thing to admit is that the relationship is no longer serving us.
That's true, but it's also the most important step towards creating something better.
Something healthier and more fulfilling.
Exactly. So
Yeah.
once you've recognized the problem, the next step is to start challenging those negative thoughts and behaviors that are contributing to the imbalance.
Those defense mechanisms we were talking about earlier.
Right, those ways of interpreting our partner's actions that are often based on our own insecurities.
So instead of assuming the worst, we need to give our partner the benefit of the doubt.
We do, and we need to communicate with them openly and honestly about our feelings.
Without blaming or accusing.
Right, because when we're able to communicate effectively, we can start to bridge that gap between us and our partner.
We can start to create a sense of understanding and connection.
Exactly, and that's the foundation of a healthy and balanced relationship.
Okay, so communication is key, but what else can we do to break free from this passion trap?
Well, Dr. Delis suggests a number of specific strategies that can help both one-ups and one-downs.
Okay, I'm eager to hear about these strategies. Let's start with the one-downs. What can they do to regain their balance in the relationship?
Well, one of the most important things for one-downs to do is to focus on their own personal growth.
To invest in themselves and to develop their own sense of self-worth.
Exactly, because often one-downs have neglected their own needs and desires in their eagerness to please their partner.
They've put their partner's needs above their own.
Right, and that can lead to a loss of identity and a sense of emptiness.
So they need to rediscover who they are and what they want out of life.
They do, and they need to start pursuing those things regardless of what their partner thinks.
Because their happiness shouldn't be contingent on their partner's approval.
Exactly, and this shift in focus can be really powerful.
How so?
Well, it can help the one down to regain their sense of self-confidence and to feel more secure in themselves.
Which can make them less needy and less dependent on their partner.
Right, and that can actually make them more attractive to their partner.
It's counterintuitive, but it makes sense.
It does, because when we're secure in ourselves, we're more likely to be relaxed and confident in our relationships.
And that can be really appealing to a one-up who's often drawn to independence and strength.
Exactly. So for one-downs, personal growth is key to breaking free from the passion trap.
Okay, so that's good advice for one-downs,
Right.
but what about one-ups? What can they do to shift the dynamic?
Well, one of the most important things for one-ups to do is to embrace what Dr. Delis calls the freedom option.
The freedom to what?
The freedom to leave the relationship.
Okay, that sounds a little drastic.
It might, but it's not about actually leaving. It's about being willing to leave.
I'm not sure I follow.
What Dr. Delis means is that when we're in a relationship, we often become complacent.
We take it for granted.
We do, and we stop putting in the effort that we did in the beginning.
But when we contemplate leaving, we're forced to reevaluate the relationship.
Exactly. We start to see it with fresh eyes, and we ask ourselves, is this really what I want?
Am I truly happy?
Right, and those are important questions to ask.
Because if the answer is no, then maybe it is time to move on.
It might be, but even if the answer is yes,
Even if you decide to stay in the relationship.
the act of contemplating leaving can be transformative.
How so?
Well, it can help you to appreciate your partner more and to start putting in more effort.
Because you realize what you stand to lose.
Exactly, and that can shift the dynamic in the relationship.
It can make you more present and more attentive to your partner's needs.
Right, and that can help to restore the balance that was lost.
So the freedom option is really about regaining a sense of choice.
It is. It's
Yeah.
about reminding yourself that you have options and that you're not trapped in the relationship.
Which can be empowering for both one-ups and one-downs.
Exactly, because when we feel empowered, we're more likely to make choices that are aligned with our values and our desires.
And that's what it's all about, creating relationships that are truly fulfilling.
It is, and that's what we'll continue to explore as we delve deeper into Dr. Delis's work.
So stay tuned as we uncover more strategies for escaping the passion trap and for building stronger, more balanced relationships.
Now, I'm curious to hear about this interpersonal circle you mentioned earlier. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Sure, the interpersonal circle is a model that Dr. Delis uses to explain how our personality styles influence our relationship dynamics.
So it's a way of understanding how our individual tendencies can either fuel or counteract the passion trap.
Exactly, and it's based on the idea that we all fall somewhere on a spectrum of two basic dimensions,
Which are?
dominance and love.
Okay, so dominance is about how assertive and controlling we are in our relationships.
While love is about how warm and affectionate we are.
Right, and depending on where we fall on these two dimensions, we tend to adopt certain patterns of behavior.
And these patterns can either create balance or imbalance in our relationships.
Exactly. So let's take a closer look at some of the different personality types that Dr. Delis describes on the interpersonal circle.
Okay, I'm all ears. Let's start with the one-down types.
Sure. So one of the most common one-down types is what Dr. Delis calls the sweet one-down.
Okay, what makes them so sweet?
Well, they're typically very caring and nurturing people. They're always putting others first.
They sound like great partners.
They can be, but they also have a tendency to be overly accommodating and to neglect their own needs.
So they're ripe for the passion trap.
They are, because they're so eager to please their partner that they often lose sight of themselves.
They become too dependent on the relationship.
Right, and that can make them vulnerable to manipulation and control.
We see this with Ginny, right?
Yeah, Ginny is a classic example of a sweet one down. She's so focused on taking care of Frank that she forgets to take care of herself.
And that ultimately leads to her own unhappiness.
It does, and it's a cautionary tale for all sweet one downs.
Okay, so what can sweet one-downs do to protect themselves?
Well, the key is to learn to balance their caring nature with a healthy dose of assertiveness.
To set boundaries and to make sure that their own needs are being met.
Exactly, because true love is not about self-sacrifice. It's about mutual respect and reciprocity.
That's a good point.
Now, another common one-down type is the echo.
The echo.
Yes, they're called echoes because they tend to mirror their partner's behavior.
They adapt to whatever the other person wants.
Right, they're very good at reading people and adjusting themselves accordingly.
So they're like chameleons.
In a way, yes, and this can be a strength in some situations.
Like when you're trying to build rapport with someone.
Exactly. But in a romantic relationship, it can be problematic.
Why is that?
Well, because echoes can lose sight of their own identity.
They become so focused on being what their partner wants that they forget who they are.
Right, and that can lead to a lot of frustration and resentment down the line.
Deborah seems to struggle with this a bit.
She does in the beginning. She's so eager to please Jonathan that she downplays her own needs and desires.
She's afraid of rocking the boat.
She is, and that's a common fear for echoes.
But it's important for them to find their voice.
It is, because true intimacy requires authenticity.
We need to be able to show up in our relationships as our true selves.
Exactly. And that's what echoes need to learn to do.
Now, what about the one-up types? Are there any common patterns there?
There are, and one of the most common one-up types is the authoritarian.
The authoritarian.
Yes, they're typically very strong-willed and controlling people.
They like to be in charge.
They do, and they often have a very clear idea of how things should be done.
Which can be helpful in some situations.
It can, but in a relationship, it can be stifling.
Because they can be too rigid and inflexible.
Right. They might have trouble compromising or seeing things from their partner's perspective.
Marshall seems to fit this description.
He does. He's very set in his ways, and he has a hard time adapting to change.
Which creates a lot of conflict with his wife and daughter.
It does, and it's a common pattern for authoritarians.
So what can authoritarians do to create more balance in their relationships?
Well, the key is for them to learn to loosen their grip on control.
To be more flexible and to allow for more spontaneity.
Exactly, because true love is not about power, it's about partnership.
That's a good point.
Now, another common one-up type is the thrill seeker.
The thrill seeker.
Yes, they're often very charismatic and adventurous people.
They love excitement and novelty.
They do, and they can be a lot of fun to be around.
But they can also be a bit flighty.
They can, because they're always looking for the next big thing.
They get bored easily.
They do, and that can make it hard for them to commit to a long-term relationship.
Frank is a good example of this.
He's always chasing after the next thrill, and he has a hard time settling down.
Which causes a lot of pain for the women in his life.
It does, and it's a common pattern for thrill seekers.
So what can thrill seekers do to create more stable relationships?
Well, the key is for them to find ways to channel their adventurous spirit in a healthy way.
To find activities that bring them joy and excitement without jeopardizing their relationships.
Exactly, because true love is not about fleeting thrills, it's about lasting fulfillment.
That's a great point, and it brings us back to the core message of Dr. Delis's work.
Which is that
finding balance in our relationships is essential for our happiness and well-being.
It is, and it's a journey that requires self-awareness, communication, and a willingness to grow.
So let's continue this journey together as we explore more of Dr. Delis's insights and strategies for creating healthy and fulfilling relationships.
Now, before we wrap up our deep dive, let's distill those key takeaways from the Passion Trap into a concise 10-point summary.
Oh, I like that. A little cheat sheet for our listeners.
Exactly, something they can refer back to as they navigate their own relationships.
Sounds good. I'm ready when you are.
All right, so number one, the passion trap emerges when one partner experiences greater emotional investment, becoming the one down, while the other, less invested, occupies the one up position.
Okay, that establishes that fundamental imbalance, right? That gap in emotional investment.
Right. Number two, ironically, the more fervently the one down seeks affection and reassurance, the more the one up tends to withdraw, creating that push-pull dynamic.
It's almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy. The more you chase, the further they retreat.
Precisely. Number three, those initial sparks of attraction, often intensified by fear of rejection, can set the stage for this unequal distribution of power within the relationship.
It's like we're blinded by those intense feelings in the beginning, and we might overlook red flags or compromise our own needs.
Exactly. Number four, both one-ups and one-downs often employ coping mechanisms that, while seemingly logical, end up exacerbating the underlying issues.
Like trying to change your partner's appearance or personality, or resorting to those temporary fixes that only mask the real problems.
Right. Number five, communication breakdowns characterized by silence, heated arguments, and blame become the norm in relationships where this imbalance persists.
It's like they're speaking different languages. Their needs and desires get lost in translation.
Exactly. Number six, for one-downs, cultivating healthy distance. A deliberate shift in focus towards personal growth and reclaiming emotional independence offers a pathway out of this trap.
It's about rediscovering your worthiness and building a sense of self outside of the relationship.
Precisely. Number seven, one-ups, on the other hand, can benefit from embracing what Dr. Delis calls the freedom option. That's exploring the possibility of leaving the relationship, even if they ultimately choose to stay.
It's counterintuitive, but that mental shift, that willingness to walk away, can actually bring more clarity and authenticity to the relationship.
Exactly. Number eight, understanding the influence of personality styles as depicted in the interpersonal circle can shed light on why certain patterns emerge and either fuel or mitigate the passion trap.
It's like having a roadmap to understand those recurring dynamics and how they contribute to the balance or imbalance in the relationship.
Precisely. Number nine, the decision to remain in or leave a relationship should hinge on the pursuit of genuine long-term happiness. Not fleeting comfort. Trusting your intuition and learning from past experiences are crucial in making these tough choices.
It's a reminder that we always have a choice, and settling for less than we deserve ultimately benefits no one.
Right. And finally, number 10, understanding the often hidden mechanics of the passion trap empowers us to create healthier, more fulfilling connections by cultivating self-awareness, practicing open and honest communication, and striving for a balance of power within the relationship.
It's like having a toolkit to build stronger, more resilient relationships.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that relationships are a continuous journey of growth and evolution.
Well, this deep dive into the passion trap has been incredibly insightful.
It has, hasn't it?
It's given us so much to think about in terms of our own relationships and those common dynamics that can lead to imbalance.
And hopefully it's equipped our listeners with some valuable tools and insights
to navigate those challenges and create connections that are both passionate and balanced.
Exactly, because ultimately that's what we all want, right? To find love that is both exciting and enduring.
Absolutely. So thank you for joining us on this journey, and we look forward to diving deep with you again soon.